Let's go.
Famous, so famous, number one, desirable. I do what I want, when I want, and how I want it. Leave you with the one in the air, that's how I roll. I got tons of soul, I'm a true collectible. Famous, so famous, number one, desirable. I do what I want, when I want, and how I want it. Leave you with the one in the air, that's how I roll. I got t-shirts, throw, I don't care about no gold. Better, so much better, flipping, incredible. Always on the show, so they know that I still got it. And I never feel sorry, yeah, top of the world. Top of the world, yeah, top of the world, top of the world, yeah, top of the world, top of the world, yeah, top of the world, top of the world, yeah, top of the world. When I hear him come like my fuse and then ba-bum. Later, see you later, I'm about to blow this up. You can sing or sing if you want, I know you want it. It's always kinda funny, yeah, cause you I'm a superstar on the sky.
Hey guys, I'm Sai and welcome to Ace Podcast Nation, the home of our originally created series, My Story. This is now our third series, and what I love about this series is no matter what, whoever it is, whatever industry they are from, everybody has got a story to tell. And as you know, Ace Podcast Nation, you're home to many great shows, original series featuring top guests, expert analysts and more. My Story, like all our other shows, available in video format at youtube.com/Ace Podcast Nation. Please do give us a subscribe, click the bell for notifications so you get a little notification every time we go live or we upload new content, interviews and stuff like that. If you prefer your podcast in audio form, then every single series and bit of content that we produce, from My Story to the Danny Batten Fight Show to the Rodri Gig Show, all on the Sports Social Podcast Network, the UK's first and only all sports podcast network. They've all got their own little sites there, so you can find that there. But for those of you who don't know, My Story is a unique series as we take our guests through their lives, their careers, from their upbringing all the way to present day, as they share memories and anecdotes, the ups and the downs. But across the two series so far, we've had actors, footballers, broadcasters, authors, filmmakers, podcasters, fighters, and more. Series 3 has already started with a bang and will be no different. The tagline is pretty simple. Real conversations with real people. It's their story in their own words. And joining me for episode 3 of this third series is a man who will... regular viewers will know well. He is part of Ace Podcast Nation. He is the co-host of the Danny Batten Fight Show, former Cage Warriors world champion, and of course a legend of British MMA. It is Mr. Danny Batten. Welcome, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, Si, and thanks for those who are listening in. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's going to be good, mate. It's going to be good. Something a bit different from what we do on a Sunday, but it's going to be fun, mate. I'm looking forward to it because obviously we're friends and we talk about MMA each week, and also we talk generally. And we did that unscripted and uncensored show, which kind of started our relationship about probably nearly 2 years ago now. But this is going to be different because we're going to really delve into like your life, and I'm going to find out things that I probably don't know. So I'm kind of looking forward to hearing some of those stories, stuff like that. So what we do is we go right back to the start, and to start us off, we have you sort of just tell us a bit about kind of where you were born, your upbringing, where it began for Danny Batten.
Yeah, well, I was born and brought up until I was 13 in Kent. I had a really good childhood. I have some really, really fond memories growing up, and I was brought up with a younger sister of 4 years and an older brother of 4 years. So I was a middle child. Comes with its benefits and also comes with its negatives as well, being the middle child. But yeah, that was largely where I grew up in my younger years. And then from the age of 13, my dad wrapped up his business and decided to sell up. We had quite a nice house in Kent, in a nice area of Kent, and he sold up and moved to Somerset, right on the coast, a little place called Burnham-on-Sea. People more know Weston-super-Mare. It's about 10 miles from there. Tiny little sleepy village, I would say, of a coastal village. But I really enjoyed it. My brother wasn't so keen on the move, being that he was sort of 16, 17. He just really established himself with friends in Kent. So it was hard on him moving. But for me, it was great. I was down by the beach. I was a real popular lad, having a London accent. In Somerset, I was a really popular lad there, and it was a great move for me and my sister. But so it was sort of like bittersweet in terms of the experiences for us kids. But for me, it was really, really positive move. And then in Somerset, I didn't move from Somerset until I met my ex that I had my children with. I think I moved from Somerset to Milton Keynes when I was around about 24. I think it was around about 1997-ish, 1998. And I've been living in Milton Keynes ever since. And living in Milton Keynes is where I had started my exposure to MMA.
Interesting, mate. Do you know, a couple of things which I picked up on straight away there, just from a personal point of view, is then first and foremost, you clearly speak really fondly of those sort of early years with your family and stuff like that. But also, Weston-super-Mare, you mentioned. I think I'm banned from that place.
Wow.
When I went on cricket tour, it didn't go well, shall we say. And I'm pretty sure that I was told to kind of never come back, which is that's another story for another time. I was young. I was like early 20s. I was sort of young, free and single, as it were. And also Kent, you mentioned. So I used to go and visit Kent a lot when I was probably like between sort of 8 and maybe up to about 12 or 13, because my mum had an aunt who lived there who she was close to when she was younger. So we used to go up and stay there quite a lot. Right. And I, from what I can remember, I was young, and I was at that point had led quite a sheltered life. But from what I can remember, Kent was really weird in that in one part you could be in like this lovely, really nice area. And then if you kind of took one street the other way, you could be in a very, very different area.
Exactly. Yeah.
But, as is it's pretty much the same as anywhere, I guess. But it's just something I remember when I was younger. If we used to go for a little like wander to the park or something, obviously we weren't familiar as young kids to the area. And they used to sort of say, don't go down that way or don't go down this way. And it was it's something which stuck with me. But anyway, back to you. So what about like high school sort of years? Like obviously we know you went into combat sports, martial arts and things like that, which we'll obviously get to. Was there any other sports that you were sort of good at, interested in? What about other hobbies and stuff outside of sport?
Yeah. So, in terms of like physical sports, my brother was really the leader of the physical sports. He was a good footballer. He ended up being an unbeaten district runner for 1,500 meters. He was very, very active, and I was very much in my brother's shadows, I suppose you'd say. And my dad ended up taking me to a football club, and it was a newly formed club for kids. And I was never really into football in a big way. I just followed my brother's footsteps, I guess you would say, and my dad sort of steered me that way. I had a couple of good years doing that, and we used to do an indoor season and we had an outdoor season, but I never really stuck at it. I played in a defensive position. I used to tackle in quite hard, and rather than being a skillful footballer, I was just like game to tackle and had lots of energy on the pitch, but I was not a great footballer by any stretch. But that really wasn't my passion. I wanted to also really be an athlete during my later years in school, but I just couldn't cut it. I think maximum my height is around about 5'10", 5'9", something like that, but with short legs at that height. I also want to be a 100-meter sprinter, and I just never really cut it, because I'd get out and be ahead of everyone at the 50-60 meter line, but those kids who matured quicker than I did, that had the height advantage, they'd hit puberty before I did, they would shut me down before the closing line. So I found I was better at long distance than I was sprinting, although my passion was with sprinting, but it never really materialized. You know, as kids, you get these aspirations, but, you know, many of them don't get followed through. And that was something that never really got followed through. But yeah, my exposure into martial arts really started as I become close with my brother. My brother, like I say, was 4 years older than me, and we really wasn't that close as kids. He was 4 years older and mature, and I was 4 years younger and rather immature. And I think I was an aggravation to him for much of our lives. But as I become older, I noticed he'd give me a little bit more time and a little bit more respect. And this was alien to me. And I couldn't believe it when one day he said about, do I want to come with him to a martial arts school? So we went and looked at a karate school, and in the same complex, which was in my old school in Somerset, we also looked at a Taekwondo school. And just being on those specific nights, I think the karate was doing patterns. And then when we turned up to watch the Taekwondo the following night, or however it was, they was doing sparring. And of course, the sparring was really up our street, and that really captivated us. And it was Taekwondo that we both went into. And yeah, that was really the start of the martial arts, really doing it with my brother. And we both were very well accomplished in Taekwondo as it was on a domestic level. And I had really, really good years there doing it, doing it with him and the others that I met through the exposure to Taekwondo. I had some good friends there. My instructor, Simon Lambert, who's still running and going now, he was really open-minded to other aspects of martial arts as well. So I had a really good introduction to martial arts through the Taekwondo years.
What about kind of like trouble that teenagers tend to find themselves in? You know, girls drinking, things like this. Was that ever kind of a thing for you, or were you more sort of more focused on athletic endeavors?
Yeah, I was very yin and yang. When I say that, you know, another sport that I got into, which was non-physical, was chess. I was a little bit of a chess prodigy through my school years from secondary school. I think from the age of, from my second year of secondary school, I started getting into chess, and I progressed very, very quickly. Started playing for Burnham-on-Sea, played for Somerset, played for West of England, and so on and so forth. And then the other aspect was, as I matured and got older, I did start going out and started meeting girls, but I was also very much into chess. And yeah, as a kid, as a teenager, I was a little scrappy. I was a good kid, but I would get my nose into other people's businesses, and I was fighting an awful lot. It was different back then to as it is now. And you know, kids used to just have a gentlemanly agreement to scrap it out at the corner of the field. And you know, I'd have me a few little fights in school, but I had a lot of trouble coming to my door, which, you know, I kind of feel sorry for my parents. You know, if one day it'd be actually interesting to interview my dad on here, because you know, he'd have certain memories. Yeah, I mean, there's been times when, you know, he would come out to the front lawn. I'd be scrapping with a kid after he just mowed the lawn. We had grass cuttings all over us, and he'd pull us up by our ears and smack us around the head, and I'd have gangs of kids. Yeah, so I did have my trouble. And when I went out drinking, I'd come back with ripped shirts and, you know, blood over my shirts. And I remember my dad saying, "Look, son, if you go out, stay out. Don't come back if you come back drunk." And coming back with, you know, I could do without, you know, the hassle from mum. And so, you know, I had this sort of like chess side of my life where it was all very intelligent and structured, and then I had this little wild side. I guess I was trying to find my footing in the world and trying to find out who I really was. Yeah, so yeah, two very, very different aspects to my life. I mean, if at the chess club knew what kind of troubles I was getting in on a Saturday night, they would have been, you know, wouldn't have been best pleased, because I would always conduct myself appropriate to the circumstance I was in. So, you know, if I was at a place where you had to be, you know, respectful and on your best behavior, I certainly could do that. But as any youngster is, when you're drawn into a certain environment where you're drinking and being silly and other people doing silly that you're in the groups with, I'd get tagged along with that and get myself in trouble. That was pretty much how I was as a teenager.
Yeah, I think that's quite common, isn't it, in terms of teenage behavior and things like that. And like we keep saying, actually, that we're going to play chess against each other, because my younger brother was a bit of a chess prodigy himself, and he was used to play for Wales, and he was pretty good. But then, similar to you, like he was kind of had one foot in both sides of things. Like he liked to have a smoke and a drink, and
Right.
that side of things, but he also was very, very good at chess. And I think he was at one point was like in the Welsh National Opera. So he had like these two sides to him, which I think is, like you said, you mentioned something there. You said you were trying to find your footing. And I think as a teenager, you're growing, you're developing mentally, physically. You are trying to find your place in the world. You're trying to find something you're passionate about. Your personality is changing and developing. So you sort of started with Taekwondo and the martial arts side of things. When did that go from a hobby to like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be a fighter?
Yeah, I always had it in my head that I wanted to be a fighter. And, you know, I've mentioned before when we did our very first podcast together where you invited me on, that, you know, as a kid, I would always play with my figures and imagine I was doing a tournament and going through the tournament and winning. It was always, and I used to always say to my dad, one day I'm going to be a champion. One day I'm going to be a champion. So it was something that was in on me. And so obviously when I went down the route of martial arts with my brother and we really achieved some great things doing the Taekwondo, I then moved away to Milton Keynes, and it really broke the closeness of the relation I had with my brother because we wasn't training Taekwondo together anymore. I did try a Taekwondo club in Milton Keynes, but it was not sparring orientated as it was at the club that we was at in Somerset. In Somerset, it was really driven to compete in, and that's really what floated my boat at the time, being I was a young kid with lots of energy. And so what happened when I moved to Milton Keynes, you know, I was kind of like lost for a little while. I moved because the woman I was with, she fell pregnant with her first child. My son, Reese Batten, and I have no regrets with that at all. But, you know, we ended up moving.
How old were you then? Sorry, mate?
She was, we was both turning 24 when my son was born. Yeah, I mean, that was a big change in my life, and it was a change that took a couple of years for me to really settle in Milton Keynes. And it was only that I was looking through a combat magazine, I believe it was, and I'd been following the career of a guy called Lee Hasdell, some old school MMAs will know who he is. He's a real pioneer of mixed martial arts, and he was largely successful out in Japan. And Japan, the whole MMA, Pancrase and Shuto, as it was more called out there, he was really successful out there. He had some great victories, some great knockouts on his resume, but was also picking up on a lot of the Japanese shoot catch wrestling style. And what happened was I was reading this article, and it was my girlfriend at the time. She said, "Oh, I know this guy. I'm sure he does the doors here in Milton Keynes." I'm like, "Wow, really?" You know, this was a shock to me. And she goes, "I'm sure he's got a class or he runs something here." I'm like, "Wow, where?" So we started to try to research and find out, and we found out he was going to start up classes a month or two from the time that I was reading this article that Claire, my girlfriend at the time, had seen. And so I went and popped along to make an arrangement to have a meeting with him. Told me about what the criteria of the classes were going to give me, what date it was going to start and what time it was going to be. And I went along, and yeah, I remember we covered some grappling moves, and I took to it like a duck to water. It was just right up my street. I really, really loved it. And as we progressed in, it was a very, very different training situation to how it is done today. You know, it was done in a training hall. There was no cage or anything. And indeed, a lot of the fights that were run back then were done in a ring. But it was great for what we had. It was the best of what we had in the UK, I would even suggest. So people used to come from wide to train with Lee Hasdell to learn these grappling arts, and it was brilliant. It was really what I needed, and it sort of brought me out of this low point of my life that I moved from my family. I was no longer training with my brother. I was largely lost, but this gave me a new flame, a new insight, a new focus, if you will. And really what convinced me that I was going to make something of myself was really the confidence that Lee Hasdell gave me at the time. And that was that we did a reward ceremony. He had booked an end of year. I think it started in the October, and then he'd done an end of year event, if you will, where he hired out a part of a nightclub, and we all end up drinking and eating together. And he said to me, although he was a little bit drunk, he said, "Look, I think you've got real potential." He goes, "What do you think about having a fight career?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I'm up for it." And wasn't too how seriously he was taking it, because he was a half cut on some drink at the time. He was really relaxing, but he kind of, like, along with that drinking, he sort of like opened up to what he thought I could do with my career. He said I had a talent. He really think I could go far, and he wanted to be pushed to fight in the following year. And indeed I did, and things led on. You know, I had a very brief amateur career and as it was back then, there wasn't much going on an amateur scene. We very quickly went semi-pro and pro as it was then. Now you have amateur and pro only. But I was briefly amateur, very, very briefly, even more briefly semi-pro, and then I very, very quickly went to pro level. And then, I mean, the career happened thereafter, just over a decade of fighting at a pro level over 2 different weights.
So you mentioned Pancras. I was just having a look there. Pancras was founded by 2 guys called Masaaki Funaki and Minoro Suzuki. Minoro Suzuki is a professional wrestler who is still wrestling today. He wrestles in New Japan Pro Wrestling. He was also on AEW and whatnot on national TV in the US and the UK, which is quite incredible because it's a long, long time ago. I think he is quite old. I'm not sure exactly how old. I think he might be sort of mid-50s to 60s, in fact.
Yeah.
But he's still going, still in amazing shape. But his character in wrestling is kind of one of brutality and one who loves, is quite sadistic. And then I know with some of his professional fights, they were quite brutal. Did you ever get to meet him in your time when you were fighting out in Pancras?
No, but I did meet a guy called Takada who fought Hickson Gracie twice. I got to meet him, and the biggest thing about meeting him, my first impression was not only that I was like, oh wow, it's Takada. I went up and introduced myself, and he was happy to have pictures taken. But was how that he looked exactly the same as he's always looked. He just hadn't aged. He obviously had a very healthy lifestyle. He just wasn't a day older from what I'd been watching from his career. I used to love watching him when he used to fight Bash Rutin, Frank Shamrock. We're really going back, and of course when he fought Hickson as well. But I didn't meet Funaki or the other guy. I won't even try to pronounce his name. I didn't get to meet them. So, but Pancras, I just fought one time out in Pancras. My first exposure to Japan was fighting ZST, which is where Imanari had risen from. In fact, my first fight out there was against Imanari. But there was many Japanese superstars that come up from ZST and from Shuto, Japan, which has been running for many, many decades, and more commonly known as Pancras because of the exposure with Frank Shamrock, Ken Shamrock, Bash Rutin, and all these stars, and Funaki.
So when you made your professional MMA debut, what company was that with?
So I had my first fight on one of Lee Asdal's shows, and it was actually done in unison with a documentary. It was a Channel 4 documentary. What was it called? I did say about it the other day on the podcast.
You did,
Oh, A Matter of Fact. So it would do different documentaries about a very, very broad subject of things, but this one was all about the whole aspect of cage fighting and mixed martial arts, and it followed my training for this first fight. And I can't remember now whether it's Night of the Samurai or whether it's a Ring of Truth. I think there's a Ring of Truth because he run 2 different productions, Lee Asdal. By the way, are you still there? Because you've gone quiet.
I am there. Yeah. Mate,
oh, you are still there. Sorry, I had a little interference
noise. A little bit funny. So just as long as you can see me and hear me, don't just carry on, mate.
Yeah. Okay, because I did hear an interference noise. I wasn't too sure whether you'd gone. So I think it was the Ring of Truth that I fought on, and and I won very, very quick. I won within 20 seconds with an armbar. I landed a couple of hard leg kicks, and the guy shot in, took me down, but I swung off my back and got an armbar very, very quick. So it was a very, very brief experience, but that was it. I was hooked up. I wasn't even sure how many times I was going to fight. I kind of did it because I wanted to see whether all those years of Taekwondo and the new skill sets I was learning on the ground, I wanted to see whether I could really perform this in the closest relation to a street confrontation without getting in trouble with the police. You got to remember, things are very different now. Now when you think about doing MMA, you think about doing it as a pure sport. Back when I was doing it, it was still structured towards self-defense largely. But so my aspect of thinking was I wanted to feel confident that I could deal with potential, issues out on the street ultimately. Because that's why you train martial arts. It's just a different time, different era. So I just wanted to have a couple of experiences and see what would happen there on after. But that experience, that buzz of walking out, having all the attention put on you, and the feeling of winning afterwards, and being held in high regard in your club and in your circles. And for me, one of the biggest things was having, my dad and my mum seeing that I was succeeding in something, because, like I say, my brother was the one leading the way and succeeding in everything. And, suddenly I was the center of attention, and it's very, very addictive for so many different reasons, like I say, such as going to the club, my circle of friends, people in my workplace started finding out what I was doing, and it was a really good feeling. And it didn't happen that I just had one or two fights. I ended up fighting many, many times.
So you've had that first fight. Like, were you nervous and stuff before that first fight, or was it, like you said, you mentioned you train in combat sports because of more being able to defend yourself, things like that? Like, at that point in your life, were you kind of like nervous before that fight? Was there that nervous energy and kind of like that side of things?
Naturally nervous, but not nowhere near as much as I was after that. Which might sound strange. You got to remember, me and my brother competed heavily in Taekwondo at the time, and you would fight numerous times in one day. So, being accustomed to a bit of nerves and how to deal with it, I was very comfortable with. But what I found happened was, once I started to notch up a couple of wins, this attention, along with the attention, become an expectation. I was sort of the star of our club, flying the flag for Shinshin Jutsu, SSJ, and the internet has started to expand with online attention. It used to be a site. What year
was this, mate? Sorry.
So I had my first fight in 1999. So this was like on the turn of the millennia sort of thing. The internet had sort of started to grow.
So there only would have been, even though you probably wouldn't have had access to them at this point, there only would have been a handful of UFC events at that point as well, because UFC was in 1993. So you're talking maybe 7 or 8 at the most.
That's right. Yeah.
And even then, at that point, you were probably you'd have been getting them on VHS, and you wouldn't have been able to get them as they were happening. It would be weeks or months later.
That's right.
So in terms of watching MMA at that point, were you able to watch, was there many local events, things like that, where you could watch other fighters and kind of, because I know you've spoken about on the shows on a Sunday, like the difficulty you had in trying to find fighters who were willing to fight you, just because there wasn't the amount of fighters, that there is now. So I just wondered, if, like you've spoken again a lot about, watching MMA, and the best fighters in the world now, especially the younger ones, are the ones who analyze everything, watch all different types of fighters to learn. Even if they're just watching 2 other people fight, they want to learn from that. And I kind of wondered how you were able to do that without having the internet. So you didn't have access to hours and hours of footage of UFC and Cage Warriors and because these companies just weren't at that level.
You would just hear about. So there was a site called SFUK. I think it kind of still runs, but that was the site that everyone would congregate to talk about up and coming fights, to talk about fighters on the scene and what kind of impact they're having, what their skill sets was. So you'd have to learn about potential opponents and future opponents through this site. And when I fought John Kavanagh, he had a lot of following, and they got put up a post. And it was a really huge post that started, about this battle between me and him on who was going to win. It had all his people saying that, he's never been tapped out in competition and he's got all the skill sets to beat me, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, I had a lot of attention and a lot of expectations on my performance. And I was very, very similar. I was known for my grappling, but in a very different way from him. He was already, I think, like a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. Back in 2001, 2002, I hadn't even trained BJJ back then. I was just still doing this shuto, Japanese shuto style on the ground, which is still largely effective. Just the positional positioning.
How did your fights go with John Kavanagh?
Okay, so back then I used to have to fight at lightweight, And I remember I had to weigh in. I weighed in with a tracksuit and trainers because I didn't want him to know how much bigger he was than me as he was back then. I was really, really light. I was walking around at about 64, 65 kilos. And I weighed in with a trainers, a shirt, tracksuit, and I just jumped on the scales. And I think around about 66, 67 kilos. And I think he cut. I think there was a weight limit. I think you could be 1.5 kilos over as it was back then. I think it was either 71.5 or 70.5 for a 70 kilo, a lightweight European belt as it was at the time. So yeah, I knew I was giving away a little bit of weight, and I heard that his grappling skills were really good. But I had been exposed to John Kavanagh in my amateurs. So Lee Asdell ran an amateur event at Stantonbury campus in Milton Keynes, and I fought 3 times in that day. And on the day that I fought 3 times, there was a super fight between experienced amateurs, and that was Matt Bowen and John Kavanagh. And John Kavanagh was looking really good with his striking. He had a 6-pack. He was really intense with his striking, but when it went to the ground, he transitioned really tight and really smooth. So I knew this kid could kind of do a bit of it all, and I was a little nervous, but I was also self-confident. And so because of the slight size advantage, it started off very, very positive for him. I took the fight to the ground, and he quickly swept me. He was dominating a lot of the exchanges, but I was able to keep scrambling. And one of the things I was very, very fit, very fit. I was doing pretty extreme training. I was very, very motivated in training to train extremely hard, more so than anyone else was doing back then. And a lot of my confidence was the fact that I could just keep going. And so the first round ended where on the scorecard I probably lost the first round, but at the end of that first round I was beginning to take over, and I knew he was tired. And what happened in the second round was we got into another ground situation where he went all out for a leg lock. And leg locks was one of the first things I ever learned in grappling because of the Japanese Shuto. That was huge on leg locks. So, him pulling on my ankle, I knew how to defend it. I come up and I noticed that his energy levels had totally changed. And really after that leg lock attempt, I was all over on him on the ground. Suddenly being lighter, smaller, fitter was really taking its toll on him. And basically his biggest lesson there was not to, shoot your load, so to speak, in that first round. He become more and more helpless. I ended up tapping him out with a bent elbow lock, or Americana, as many people will know it. And it felt good. I mean, this fight had so much on it because of all that we've been written about it on this SF UK site. And also the person I was chasing so hard was Lee Remedios. And Lee Remedios had got a decision win over John Kavanagh previous to this. And Lee Remedios at the time was saying, look, I'll fight Danny Batten when he's beaten someone of note. I can't see him getting past someone like John Kavanagh. If he beats John Kavanagh, I'll fight him. So, of course, I grabbed the mic and I said, look, no one thought I was going to win this fight. I did. I put him away. And now, Lee Remedios, I'm coming to get you. But, it still didn't come about. He was having his fight career. I was having mine. And, unfortunately, we never got to meet. It's not to say that we did try to, because we did, but unfortunately I got injured with it, which kind of was a bit of a famous post as well.
Yes, it was. We talked about that before. I wish I should have thought of it and I could have brought the clip in, but I completely forgot about it.
A lot of it was done tongue in cheek. I mean, Lee Remedios was really known as an internet troll at the time.
Oh, he still is, man.
And he is. I mean, he's softened himself somewhat now. He articulates himself very, very well now. I mean, back along, he was a borderline bully on there and was very immature in his approach. But if you watch the way he puts posts up now, the guy's clearly intelligent. Oh, yeah. And I have a lot of respect, and I really take what Lee posts up. I really look into what he posts up.
The show I did with him, I think it was just before yours, or either just before or just after. Was one of my favorite shows I've ever done with anyone, and obviously you know some of the names I've had the pleasure and the privilege and been lucky enough to speak to, including people like Mighty Mouse Johnson, who I never thought I'd ever get the opportunity to have any time with. But Lee's show is right up there with me because he's so articulate. He's not afraid to say something, kind of give an honest opinion on something, that even if it was maybe a controversial subject or something which maybe some people would shy away from, he was perfectly happy to kind of go down that route. And I think I really enjoyed speaking to him. Who would have won that fight between you two?
Oh man, I would have won. But without a doubt, he'll be saying he would have won. Listen, this was the way it was.
How would you have beaten him?
I probably would have ended up submitting him. So this was it. If I was going to lose, it would have been because he would have wrestle screwed me. One thing that Lee was good at that no one else was good at in Europe was wrestling. He had a really good double leg shoot. He was very short in stature, very muscled and very compact. And he would kind of screw people over with the wrestling, really. And he was savvy enough on the ground to spoil you. He had great transitions. It was small at the weight as I was at 70 kilos. But he was one of the bigger guys in that. I don't know whether he's ever on gear, but he was very highly muscled. And if you have a look at him now in his late 30s, he's ripped and lean and fighting at a much, much lighter weight. So I don't know. You'd have to ask him on that one, but I don't know whether he was on gear, but he looked geared up. But he's also
a lot of fighters, mate, on gear back in the day, like because it wasn't regulated at all, was it?
No, it wasn't. I'm sure there was abuses of it, but it took me. I always look at
that you were ever not tempted by, but like offered.
No,
were you
not
ever
offered
it, or
no,
like
never offered it. And it would not
were you
interest me.
aware that there was people who were doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the people that I fought against had all the telltale signs of being on the gear. But
how did you feel about it at the time? Because I know, like now, we've talked about it before, and we feel it's so disrespectful to your opponent, etc., etc.
It is
the dangers of it, the dangers of fighting it anyway, and then when you add in things like an unfair advantage like that, it is what it is. But I just wondered if your opinion of it at the time, because do you hear some fighters say, they're so confident in their own ability that they say I don't care if he's on the gear or not, I'll knock him out, I'll flatten him, I'll submit him, whatever.
Yeah.
I wondered if your opinion has changed over the years to facing people who could possibly be.
Yeah. I mean, I don't agree with it because now you could potentially be robbing someone of some kind of financial security because people put a lot into the fighting now. There's a lot of potential to gain financially out of it where you can secure your life. Yeah. And so in aspects, I think, the cheating is not only more of a temptation now, but if you can get away with doing it, it can lead to riches. And you're also then potentially denying those who are not on gear to not have those riches. So
how did you feel about it back in the day?
Back in the day, there was nothing else to gain other than the win on your record. Financially, it wasn't really giving you anything. It was just really the ego side of things. And I always felt I could beat every time I stepped in that cage or in the ring, as it sometimes was back then. I always felt I was unbeatable. And I was like that in my Taekwondo years. It was just my personality. I always felt that I could win. And
you ever lost a Taekwondo bout?
Yes, I did lose. I mean, Taekwondo, sometimes you'd fight 6-7 times in a day. But I won many of the tournaments. Me and my brother both, at the times as we was going through our ranks, we were both quite often winning our divisions. He was lightweight, I was featherweight. But as I matured as a teenager, I started to match him in height and I started to gain weight. And we ended up fighting both at lightweight, and we actually end up fighting we ended up fighting each other in the Southern British Championships, which the whole hall, my dad, his girlfriend at the time, that's now his wife, all had to watch. Us two brothers fight it out in the final, for which I actually lost.
A lot of brothers, famously in boxing, in obviously got the Pitbull brothers in Bellator. One of them vacated the title, so they didn't have to face each other. Recently, the Diaz brothers, they've always said they would never face each other. And if one of them was the champion and the other one became the number one contender, they would vacate it and stuff like that. Was that because it was Taekwondo, so it was more martial art based than fight based, or was it just you two as your personality were happy to go at it?
Yeah, I think at the time, I think my brother would have always fought me because I was the younger one, and I was always, like I say, in his shadow. Yeah, and we were both very, very different martial artists, and we're very, very different people. Like I say, I was very scrappy orientated. Got myself in and out of trouble, and my brother was always the opposite. He's always had a very structured life. he saw the only time the need to fight is when there was no other option to fight. He just did not get the whole fighting in the cage. To him, that was too closely related to the street, and it was unnecessary.
Okay.
It just wasn't logical to him. The Taekwondo was more play-based. But that said, had he wanted to go into MMA and he become a title holder, and I wanted to get up into those ranks or vice versa, I think we would have fought each other. I don't know. My mentality is that,
mate. That really is
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
So you
Because I
mentioned
don't see
there,
it as
like
a fight.
yeah,
It's not a fight. It's a sport to me. That's all it is.
So you mentioned there that your brother was kind of like he didn't understand the logic to the fighting in the cage and stuff like that. So when you went into MMA, like I know you've said to me before, your parents were very, very supportive of you in everything that you kind of pursued. Was your brother against you going into MMA as a career, or was he less supportive, or was it,
No, he
or he
was
was still
fully.
all in?
Back then, I had a lot of people. Like I say, I was really flying the flag for SSJ, Shinshujutsu at the time.
I think you were flying the flag for MMA, UKMMA, mate. I think you
Yeah,
should
yeah,
give
yeah.
yourself the credit.
Yeah, absolutely. But along with doing that, my brother noticed I had a lot of yes men, as it'd be called, around me,
Yeah.
telling me how great I was and da da da. And my brother would tell me always the home truth. He goes, "Yeah, you're doing well, Dan, but you're not doing this so well." He would always be that truthful whisper in my ear. And
You
my
need
brother
that.
did my. Yeah, absolutely, you do. And he was always that true, honest voice. That sometimes I used to get offended by it, being a young, tenacious guy,
Yeah, of
and
course.
it used to miff me off a little bit. But as I do now, I really have a lot of respect for my brother. He's a really good guy, and he always. I learned as I got older, he was only ever talking from his heart because he wanted the best for me, because he knew that these mistakes that I was having in my game would get exposed as I approached at a higher level. So, through his guidance and his truthful suggestions to things that I was doing not so well, that he felt were going to be exposed, I addressed them before they did get exposed, and I've got only
Interesting,
him to
mate, that
thank
is.
for that. Yeah.
So,
So
do you know why I find that? Sorry to interrupt you, mate. I was just going
yeah,
to say, do you know why I find that ultimately even more interesting is this very week, as we're talking, Kevin Holland has just been released by the UFC, and a lot of people were quite
oh
surprised by that.
really?
But
I'm gutted.
I saw a few people who would know saying that the people he surrounds himself with are a bit like that sort of yes men.
Yeah.
And I think there's a few fighters around Europe and around the US who aren't living up to their full potential, abilities, talent wise, because the people that they've got around them day in, day out aren't maybe telling them the home truths, telling them what they need to work on, etc. And it's a problem because the bigger you get as well, the more famous you get, and the money comes in, and the things like this come in. The people around you benefit from that as well. So they don't want you to kind of they don't want to upset you. And I'm talking generally now, not anyone in particular or you. I'm just talking, not even Kevin Holland, just generally. Like they don't want to upset people because then if they upset them and they fall out, they lose the benefits of being part of that person's clique or their little, their crew or whatever it may be. And obviously you can have things like family relationships and things like that intertwined within coaching teams and whatever. So like it can be problematic, but I think absolutely it's important to have people, whether it's coaches or family or someone who will always tell you the truth, even if you don't want to hear that truth at the moment, and it might take you a bit of time to process it. You need that person, and I think you need that out, not just in sport, in fighting. I think you need that in life. And my wife is that for me. Like she will tell me if I made you a show, and everyone else might be saying is great. She will tell me what I could do better, what wasn't good, or maybe that's not what you should be talking about, or you said that in a way that maybe isn't appropriate, or whatever it may be. Like she'll tell me, and she knows that I might take offense to it initially or be defensive, but she also knows that once I've kind of thought about it and got my head around it, I'll address it. But it's because
absolutely.
Like it's because I'm passionate about it. I'm defensive of what I've built. So I equally then, if someone sort of criticizes it or criticizes me, or I feel like they are, my initial reaction is to protect it and to protect myself. So it takes, unfortunately, it's one of my biggest faults is sometimes I'm quick to go on the defensive instead of maybe understanding the reasons why something's being said to me. But go back to you. I am fascinated by, was there anyone in your life, whether close or sort of on the outer perimeters, who was critical of you going, because look, MMA wasn't what it is now when you were pursuing this career. You weren't really pursuing that from a financial gain point of view, I wouldn't have thought. It was from a gain of, I want to be the best, like a sport inside of it. So was there people in your life or who you knew who were kind of like, come on, Dan, go and get like a, go and get a job or go and do a career, go and do this or go and do that, rather than pursuing this? And I'm interested in that side of it as well.
No, I mean, from the time that I got into MMA as a career, I was still having to run a full-time job. I had a young family. I ended up having 2 children. And I was just very driven to just do what I was loving to do. I liked competing, and it was in my blood to do so. And I wanted to be the best I can be, even if it was third best. To me, I was still number one to myself by striving to be the best that I can be. But I wanted to find out where that was. Am I 5th best, 6th best? I don't know. And I want to know. And the reason why I wanted to strive was because I really believed in my whole heart that I was the best at the time. And I did. I got to being ranked number 1 in the UK, in Europe, and I become a world champion and defended it to a point where I kept the belt. I did a lot of really good things. It was just in my blood to do so.
So, go on.
Go on.
I was just going to
go on.
I was just going to say, like, obviously, as I mentioned, MMA wasn't what it is now.
Yeah.
But Cage Warriors was starting to maybe get, even though it's a very different company back then, it was starting to get some sort of a bit of a reputation as the bigger promotion within the UK. How did your first sort of fight with them and your interactions with them come about? Was it just a sort of a natural thing where you were just trying to get fights and they were a company you could get fights with, or?
Yeah, what happened was I actually retired. Because of like having a full-time job, having to do overtime. I was the sole earner. I was a little bit old-fashioned. I wanted the mother to be at home, ideally, and we had the agreement she was happy to do so. So I was always working my normal day, doing overtime, getting paid to coach, doing one-to-ones. I was working very, very hard. But what happened when I was under Lee Hasdall's guidance, there was a time that he got me to fight out in Japan at featherweight, and I did that. I fought him in Airy. And then when I come back, I arrived back, I think, on the Wednesday night, Thursday, something along those lines. And he put me in with a lightweight bout against Gene Silva, who ended up fighting in Heroes Japan. And, it was a top Brazilian guy. And I really didn't want to do the fight. So, I was jet lagged. I had to come back and work straight away. Being a postman, I was up at 4 a.m. And I have to work on a Saturday as well. I'm up at 4 a.m. doing overtime all the time. And I did a thing called
like
SA.
You were being very fatigued mentally as
well.
I
was jet lagged. I was tired, but Lee still called me up. That's right. Yeah, I got back on the Wednesday night. I had to try to sleep, get up for work on the Thursday. And then I got a call from Lee saying to fight that weekend against Gene Silva. And Gene Silva was fighting at lightweight. I was very much underweight. I was walking around about 67 kilos. I know Gene Silva at the time would have cut down from about 77 kilos to lightweight. And he was due to fight Jens Pulver, who was a former UFC champion. So this was a big fight he was preparing for, and he's fighting on Cage Rage. And I said to Lee, I'm not so sure. I'm a bit tired, and I have to work Saturday. And he goes, no, look, you lost to him in Airy. Let's get straight back on it, and let's fight for this title and get this lightweight belt and put you straight. But I just didn't want to do it. Even when I arrived on the day, I was exhausted from work. I had my doubts and reservations about the whole thing. And what happened was, after that fight, I lost on decision. I made a good account of myself. I just felt too small. I nearly got submissions on the guy, but I was on the receiving end of of the difference in weight. Basically, I ended up with really bad concussion to a point where I actually was not sure whether I had a clot on my brain or something was wrong. I had really heavy dizziness. Was not feeling very well for months afterwards, and I decided to take time out from the fight game and just stick to grappling. And what happened was I'd just been exposed to jiu-jitsu with a guy called Eduardo Cahilio. He's now running a very successful club with Gracie Barra in London. And it was a great exposure. We actually started to train on a carpet in a mosque when I first got exposed to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But I knew this is what I needed to do a system which was not being impacted around the head because of obviously what happened to me. So I really took on BJJ. I helped get him into a club that I was training at called Total Dojo. So he could actually start teaching. I said to this guy, Tony Davis has got Total Dojo still running. I taught there for about 10 years and created a very successful MMA team before I then left and come under BST. I said to him, look, this guy has got some knowledge. He's a great jiu-jitsu, really passionate. Can we work something and get him in here? So we went from doing the jiu-jitsu on a carpet, rolled out carpet in a mosque, to then going under Total Dojo. And then what happened was with Cage Warriors, there was a new guy come around, a French guy called Emmanuel Fernandez. And he come along and basically submitted everybody with a triangle from rank number 5 in Europe to number 4, 3, 2, and 1. He tapped them all out in one round with a triangle. And he's now got a famous gym in France called the Pythagoras Gym. I think he was a former European black belt no-gi or gi champion, so a very well-established grappler. And he also now held the title of World Featherweight Cage Warriors champion. And I got contacted by Cage Warriors about me fighting. And at the time, I had no manager. I had no really intentions coming back. But one of my guys that I was training with called Chris Clear, he was just a training buddy of mine, but he was very, very strong in life in terms of management. He was managing all his own affairs regards to his financial setting. And he said to me, look, Dan, what do you think about coming back? He goes, you're doing amazing with your jiu-jitsu. I know you've got great striking pedigree. He goes, why don't you fight anymore? So I explained what happened. He goes, well, what if I manage you and we'll both collectively together pick the right fights that feel good for you? I also said about the financial situation because there was no money in it. He goes, I'll make sure you get decent money. So it was both the combination of meeting Chris Clear and a combination of, I think it was like Ian Dean still back then from the time that it started, and Dougie Truman saying to me, look, this guy's come on the scene. He's a French guy. He's wiped the floor with everyone in Europe. You're known for your grappling skills. Would you make a comeback? We'll put the title up for the grabs for you for your first fight back in. And with the confidence that I had that I was going to get a decent fight purse through meeting my manager, Chris Clear, knowing that we was both going to collectively work together, so I had a big say-so on who I'd do and don't fight, was confidence building for me. And I thought, why not? I actually felt like I had coaching under Eduardo that I could really take this far again. And I did. I went and fought this Emmanuel Fernandez and I actually beat him with his own signature move of a triangle. I beat him in the second round, I think 1 minute 40 or something odd seconds into the second round. I remember going back to my corner.
2 minutes 18 into the second round. Okay. And what's interesting, mate, is that his fight before you was against Lee Remedios in Cage Rage, which is really fascinating. So obviously a little rivalry and stuff. I know that you had.
How did that go? I think
it doesn't say. So it says for all the fights before that, it says triangle choke and the time. And for the fight against Lee, it just says win. It doesn't say the method, unfortunately. Which is
I'm not too sure. Yeah, I'm not too sure. I know he wiped everyone out with triangles, and so it was kind of ironic that I beat him with his own signature move, and he used it with a system of guard. I called it strike guard, which is very, very similar as it developed to Eddie Bravo's system of working his guard, although it is slightly different. But I basically used the concept of this strike guard to get him in a fixated posture position where I'm striking, where if he tries to strike back, he opens up the triangle opportunity. So it is something that he perhaps wouldn't have been familiar with. So even back then, I was very much trying to come up with my own concepts. And basically nearly everything that we do here at BST Academy as a structured MMA is not done fundamentally as everyone else does it. I've very, very much structured it out of my own exposure to martial arts, understanding body mechanics, tactics, strategy. I've really used the approach of chess, if you will, to my approach to the martial arts. I see it very, very similar, albeit a physical one. And I come up with this system to fight against his jiu-jitsu skills, to try to push him into an area where I could actually pull off some moves that come from a different direction that he wouldn't be familiar with, so he didn't have a reaction for. And he fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. In fact, when I come back to my corner, I had at the time my coaching had changed from Eduardo to Sanjino to Zamasello, for which Zamasello was the governing body person of Eduardo and Sanjino, as it was back then. He was in my corner, and he goes, "Hey, bro, try to get on top." And I'm like, no. Trust me. I'm going to let him take me down. I can beat this guy off my back. I know the mistakes. I just felt that I knew I could win it off my back. So I did a come out in that second round. He shot in. I didn't even waste energy on defending the takedown. And I worked my magic with this strike guard, as I called it. And I nailed in the submission. And my life really changed then. Suddenly, I had some form of financial gain from doing the sport. I had true recognition on an international level because Cage Rage had big investment with Dougie Truman. He was a wealthy businessman, invested a lot of money in the sport, and I had recognition on a world scale, if you will. And this whole attention thing, this addiction to enjoying this process, this kick, I was hooked again. And then I pushed through with my career, and I had a very successful career onwards. And I thank Dougie and Ian Dean for giving me the opportunity to fight in Cage Warriors, because that really opened me up to some other exposure, fighting out in the States and fighting out in Japan again. Yeah, I have no regrets.
On that same card, you had Dan Hardy was defeated by David Barron in one of the earlier events, and in the co-main event, Michael Bisping was defeated by Cyril Dibiatier. So some big British legends. In terms of what was next for you, first of all, as someone who was so passionate about fighting and about the sport of martial arts, and you wanted to prove that you were the best, that addiction and that pressure on yourself to be the best you could be, surely being the world champion was a kind of a moment that you must have been able to take in at some point and kind of enjoy, or were you keen to kind of go on and defend it? And
I was very keen. I was very keen to defend it, because even though I won it, I'm one of these people that I get to a goal and then I reset other goals. I do this even with playing, say, PS4 games. I'll do a level on a game, and then I'll do it on the hardest level. Then I'll do it on the hardest level and do it with only one weapon and not use any other weapon. I just do this. I make things hard for myself, and I enjoy the challenge of problem solving to find success, even when it's all against you, to have that success. So I had no problems whatsoever in wanting to defend it. And what I wanted to do, I remember having this discussion with my manager at the time, that I wanted to fight the best grapplers and out-grapple them. I want to fight the best strikers, and I want to strike with the best strikers. And the only thing I couldn't really prove that I was any good at, because I wasn't, and I just couldn't get exposed to the coaching, was the wrestling. I could not wrestle for toffee. We just didn't have the coaching capabilities here. So, the good thing was I was good enough to strike with the best strikers, and I was good enough to grapple with the best grapplers, because, I just left it that, okay, I don't have the capability to push it into the arena I needed. Ultimately, I was always going into my fight as a striker, and I would win from the feet. And if they want to take it to the mat, I'll deal with it on the mat. And that was, quite evolved thinking as it was back then. Certainly in today's standard and level of MMA, that doesn't work. I think you've got to be able to push it in the area that's weakest regards to your opponent that you're up against. And you've got to have that wrestling aspect to steer it. Because there's amazing grapplers, and there's always going to be a grappler that's going to be better than you on any given day, and there's always going to be a better striker than you're striking on any given day. And trust me, you're going to want to rely on that wrestling to both steer it into a different direction to try and problem solve and find a way to win, or likewise, if you're winning on the feet and this guy's grapple screwed you, you want to know that you've got your striking and your anti-wrestling, use that wrestling to keep it on the feet and keep it in that arena where you stand the best chance to win.
So with regards to that, I wanted to ask you a question, and obviously, as you know, I don't mean any offense by it or anything like that, because you had an incredible career. I was interested if, when you look back and you see what Michael Bisping went on to achieve, what you went and you see what Dan Hardy achieved, Is there regret there that you didn't get the opportunity to go and try yourself in the UFC?
No, because they didn't have featherweight. So I started out my career as a lightweight because there was no other divisions.
Right.
And so I was given away weight in the very early years at 70 kilos. I was never a 70 kilo fighter. I was too small. I was walking around at 64 kilos at the beginning of my career. Naturally got heavier as I got older. Then they brought in the featherweight division, and that's when I really started to make my inroads and start to really get noticed because I was fighting in the weight division that was suitable for myself. People like me, Neil McLeod, Lee Remedios, we were fighting at lightweight when we were under 70 kilos. I mean, you take Neil McLeod, he was walking around at 61 kilos, fighting 70 kilo guys. I mean, just insane.
Yes.
So
Madness.
they introduced on the European scene the featherweight, but it still hadn't made UFC yet. They still only had lightweight up until 2010, and 2010 was when I had my last fight, and Graham Boylan brought it up. Amazing, it goes to show the intelligence of people like Ben Doherty and Graham Boylan. He remembered my fight, remembered who I fought, that I won. I fought Padavia, and afterwards when I announced that I probably wasn't going to fight again, they brought in the featherweight division, but I was already 37 years old. So I don't have any regrets because there was nothing to regret because there was no division for me. I was certainly too small to fight lightweight out in UFC at the level that I was fighting at even back then. So no, I don't have regrets. The only thing that I perhaps could wish for was that they brought featherweight in at maybe 2006, 2007, and I could have had a chance at having an impactful career in UFC. But some of the people that I did fight went on to UFC. I fought out in Las Vegas against Demasio Page. He had a successful career to a point. He went down a weight, I believe, when he went over to UFC. But I fought and beat him out in Las Vegas. So I know I was of that caliber. Tom Nimanaki, who I also defended my title against, who was a former world kickboxing champion. I fought and stood with him for 5 fights in Cage Warriors to defend my title. He went on to UFC. So I knew I was of that caliber because I'd beat people who moved on and made something of themselves in the UFC, although not becoming champions in UFC. I knew I was of that caliber, and I can sit comfortable that I know that within myself. But it just wasn't to be. I don't really believe in mystical things, but I'm happy and comfortable to let the process of life take its direction as much as we making decisions in my life. It was a decision in my life that I couldn't make. They didn't have featherweight, and by the time they did, I was very much in my twilight years physically. I was only ever going to be on the decline at 37 years old in such a lightweight bracket. Yeah, what can I say? It wasn't about for me. As it would, if it was, I would have done it, but it wasn't, and I'm okay with that. Not a problem.
Good stuff. So if you have fought in many different countries, or should I say, first of all, do you remember every country you've ever fought in?
Well, yeah, I went out to Sweden. Remember that? I went out to Japan 3 times. I went out to Las Vegas. So I've been about a bit, not like massively compared to what you can do today, but for someone back then, that was quite a big deal to travel around as much as I did travel to fight. So
yes.
Yeah, of course I remember. That was
there a favorite?
I really enjoyed Tokyo. A very, very alien place for any Westerner. They don't cater for Westerners in that there's not much English signage. You go anywhere, it's such an alien language, you can't even it's hard to get yourself about. And but the experience of Tokyo was amazing. So I've got fond memories of it all. Las Vegas was totally different from Tokyo, but amazing in itself as well. I've enjoyed them all, to be honest. I don't want to say one over the other because I really don't have a favorite. I enjoyed it all. Sweden was beautifully clean, very, 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 very clinical looking place. I don't know how else to describe it. The buildings were so beautiful. Even when they're old, they look like they'd been built only a week before. Very, very clean place. I loved it. I loved them all, and that was a real high point of the addition of having a fight career, was that I was getting exposed to many experiences of different places and cultures, and I really embraced it as well. When I was out in Japan, I was eating raw fish. I really embraced their diet. I really wanted to get involved in wherever I was at the time.
Interesting stuff, mate. So, so once you retired from fighting, How did you find that? Was that a difficult period? Because I'd imagine for someone who's dedicated their whole life and career to that point to fighting and martial arts, it must have been a bit of a change at the very least, to adapt to not training, for fights, basically. I know you would have still been training, and we'll get to your coaching side of things, but obviously
sure.
it was a change.
Yeah, it was, because you go from a competitive mindset to suddenly, not competing, not having any way to satisfy that natural instinct. But what happened was that instinct began to subside, and I suddenly wasn't enjoying the thought of a weight cut. I wasn't relishing the idea of getting home tired, taking my kids out to play football or play down the park and daydreaming because I'm so shattered, or thinking about what I've got to do ahead. I suddenly realized that the sacrifices to have this career were no longer giving me the benefits over the negatives. And I started to realize how selfish the fight game was for my family. And I just didn't do it. You know what happened?
It sounds like you were ready.
I was, yeah. And at the time when you're competing, I was always one of these people. I was competing jiu-jitsu tournaments, no-gi tournaments. I fought Thai boxing professionally. I was doing everything all at the time I was doing my MMA. I was hooked on competing, testing myself. But I think as well, and I was really trying to impress my dad. I wanted to feel like my dad was proud of me, and and then I realized I didn't have to do all that for him to be impressed. He was already impressed of how I was as a man, and I realized I was banging my head against a brick wall. I was already there, but it was a process that I had to do for myself, and I got over it. I was very much driven with a chip on my shoulder for recognition. I wasn't very successful in school. I struggled in school, and I was not natural in school, but chess was actually the first thing that gave me confidence. I'm like, oh, I am smart. I just had to be interested in it. But I had to be interested in it and I started to realize that, hey, when I'm really interested in something, I'm pretty smart with it. I would say I think about things very, very much out the box. Hence I say everything we do structured here is based on a whole new theory of thinking. I don't do the structured striking how everyone else normally approaches it. I'm very much out the box with it, but it's led to successes, so it's given me confidence that what I'm doing is on the correct correct path, albeit from a different route from everyone else. I just think, look, if you do everything the same way everyone else is doing, then it's going to be just down to who's fitter, who's stronger on the day. I like the idea of just doing something slightly offbeat, that's not expected, and I don't know, you just do it your own way. I think that's great. It gives you a better sense of satisfaction.
So you were already coaching throughout this sort of period anyway, but you obviously, when you retired from fighting, then you obviously became when did you make the move to a full-time coach, in terms of no other job? And
it was a very natural progression. So some people would think that you'd make solid decisions on it. And for me, to be honest with you, although the decision was made, it got put in my lap, literally got put in my lap. I was already coaching twice a week, along with my fight career anyway. So I already had my foot halfway in the door. And then as I just realized I didn't want to fight. So, just to sort of finish off, about my fight career, there was times when I had the idea of fights, and I was going out running. I'd come back and I'd cry, or I'd cry when I was running, because I felt like I was making myself do it, and I didn't want to do it. And that was another part of what led me to. I'm like, hang on, I ain't even enjoying this. I don't want to do this anymore. But I digress back. So with the coaching, I needed something to fill that space. And so I started teaching more. I started teaching at another place. I was coaching and teaching at Total Dojo, then at a place called Immortal MMA, also based in Milton Keynes. Then I started teaching for BST, which was under a different person than it is now. It was under a friend of mine called Sid. And so I was just teaching at many, many clubs. And what happened was I started to realize I was earning more money doing that than I was out of my normal job being a postman. And so I ended up giving up the job as a postman and taking on more commitments as a coach. And then over the course of time, of course, I've ended up coming under full time as it changed hands from Sid to Greg Lunn, who's still the owner of BST Academy now. He's very, very business minded and structured. And I had confidence that, hey, you know what, I could put all my eggs in one basket with this guy. So I gave up Total Dojo first, then I gave up Immortal MMA, and then I went full time under BST Academy with Greg Lunn, and I've become more and more heavily involved. And now I'm very much tied in financially to this the company, and it's not been a bad move. It's been very, very good. I can't imagine I'm going to do anything else with my life financially or workplace wise until my retirement. This place is here to stay. I'm here to stay with it, and I'm in a very, very happy position.
And like we've talked about before, the facilities that you have at your facility are amongst the best in the UK. And as MMA grows and grows, obviously more and more people, I would imagine, will be looking to use top facilities. And you've also openly said that you encourage fighters and camps from other people to come and train and see the facilities, use the facilities. In terms of kind of looking back towards sort of your whole career, what do you think have been the hardest points to deal with from a kind of mental point of view, or maybe periods where there was real lows that were difficult to navigate?
I remember really feeling under pressure when I had 3 losses in a row. And I was thinking, how can I go from everyone thinking I was untouchable to then thinking about fighting again and possibly losing 4 times in a row? Because it's always been in my blood as a competitor back from my chess years. And I was largely getting comfortable with being a winner. And when you've got that mindset and you're thinking you're invincible, and yet now you're losing, you start to doubt the person that you are. That was very, very difficult. I felt pressure, and then when I thought I was fighting nervous, but when you've got trajectory of a number of wins, that has the reverse effect. You start feeling really, really invincible. But yeah, certainly when I had those losses in a row, I started to really doubt, am I as good as I thought I was? And that was a real challenge. But it's a challenge I accepted and I overcome, and I feel really proud of myself that I stuck it out and found a way. And I began to realize that through the difficulties, you either dissolve and accept it in a negative way, or accept it in a positive way, and you problem solve. I problem solved through having the right type of people around you, saying where you're probably going wrong, be accepting that and taking it on board and doing what needed to do to change, to get back on winning ways. And and I'm big on that. It's problem solving, right? And
absolutely,
yeah, you do what you got to do.
So we had a question sent in from Gaz, because I mentioned on Sunday that we were filming this at some point soon, and he asked, what was your first opinion or first view? What did he say? I'm trying to find it. What was your first thought when Sai asked you about doing a regular podcast?
I was excited, because to talk about something that you're loving is easy conversation, right? I felt your passion for it. You had already been doing podcasting with football and other aspects, and I felt rather privileged that you asked me to do it. I know that you had interviewed other people with your podcast, and it was really nice when you sent me a message saying, hey, I felt like a click with you, what do you think about doing this? And it felt nice. It always feels nice when you feel that someone felt close and easy with you. It makes you feel good. And so first and foremost, it was the fact that you felt a connection with me. Felt great, because I felt that connection with you. You're very, very easygoing. I really enjoyed doing it with you. And the thought that we could be working alongside each other on a weekly basis was exciting. And again, to reiterate, to talk about something that I have a love and a passion for, it's just easy. And so rather than it being a bind, thinking, I've got to do this podcast on a Sunday. Sometimes it's hard to fit in, don't get me wrong, with my busy schedule. I always utterly enjoy doing it. Not only do I get to hang out with you, which I enjoy doing every Sunday, but you're doing such a great job of bringing in guests. I know it's not easy, and we've had to work together to get guests on. But my God, you've done such a great job of getting guests on. I mean, you have had Marty Mo on numerous times, Gary Tonan on numerous times, Vaughan Lee. But not only that, we've had grassroots level. We've had top judges with Paul Sutherland. That was excellent.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting to rub shoulders with some really interesting people, really intelligent people. And, just recently, the one that's blown both our minds in Ben Doherty, not only to do with MMA, but to do with boxing now. I mean, crikey, I wouldn't have had this exposure if it wasn't for the approach that you had with me. And to be doing this 2 years now, it's had another exciting aspect to my life. So not only have I got my coaching, not only do I have my family life, but I also have this another life of podcasting with you. And it's just brilliant, man. I can't tell you. And it becomes a focus and a talking point here at the gym. People watch it and they get talking about it. And it's a real buzz. And it's another aspect of my life that's going well. I'm so lucky. And, when I said things fall in your lap, weirdly, things just fall in my lap. And, it's through no hard work of my own. It hasn't been. It was just an opportunity got presented to me through you that I took it with both hands grabbing, and it's been nothing but a positive thing, and it's going from strength to strength. I'm really looking forward to 2022 with you. I think the podcast is just going to grow and expand, and I think we're going to get international exposure very, very soon.
Yeah, we've been very lucky. I say lucky. I think it is down to hard work rather than luck, but certain things have kind of come about because of that hard work, which have then had a knock-on effect on other stuff. Obviously, I had made the contacts with one championship and their
that's huge. That was huge,
and that was massive because that meant that I didn't even have to go through their company and that thing. I can just kind of contact this one person, and there's a list of people you can have, which again was down to hard work, which brought about luck. Brought about how to get Mighty Mouse on, which is someone, like I mentioned earlier, who I never thought I'd have the opportunity to have 5 minutes with, let alone sit down and have half an hour with or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But then even, like Paddy the Baddie, we've had him a couple of times. And like, he's off. It's going to be very difficult to get him now because he signed that deal with Barstool Sports and he's out in America. And, look, I'm so happy for him because what he did is he waited for the right time to go. He could have gone to the UFC probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, almost. I don't know if it's quite that long, but it is, 5 years ago. It was when they first were asking him, and he waited because he thought he wasn't ready.
And he wouldn't have been ready. It was absolutely the right decision.
Yeah. And look at him now, making money, and hopefully his fight career goes from strength to strength. But I feel privileged that we were able to speak to him and have him on the show. And he gave us a good hour of, as he does, his brutally honest stuff. And we've been blessed with being all these different guests. Even last week when we had Cage Warriors president Graham Boylan on, we didn't expect that to happen 24 hours before it did, but it did. And I think, but also, which I think we shouldn't overlook, is before Graham came on, we had an amateur from America, Josh Reichart, who I thought was really, really good. Really interesting to speak to. And that's something that wouldn't have probably happened. Someone who was due to come on had rearranged. So we had a gap with only like a couple of days to go. And then I'd had to be a bit creative, and magically the kind of creativity just came off in droves. But it's a privilege, mate. And for me, like, as you know, I wind you up a little bit and make little comments sometimes about your age and this and that. But like ultimately, like to me, you're one of the absolute OGs of UKMMA. So to me, like, you're like someone who I look up to massively. And that would be, even if we weren't doing a podcast. So like to get the opportunity to make a friendship and to speak to you each week is phenomenally exciting for me. I enjoy it on a regular basis. And look, just very quickly, like in terms of like where the podcast is going, as you know, we've got a few little exciting things in the works, which are hopefully going to be sorted by the end of next week. But also, we're fully booked until Christmas for guests because it's just it is what it is. Of course, you've got to go and book those people, but those people don't have to do it. You know, we're not like I don't know, it's not like UFC Fight Pass or it's not ESPN. They don't have to do it. So they choose to do it, which I think says a lot about what we're building. And I had someone else say the other day that they think it won't be long before there's, how can I phrase this? Other companies sniffing around what we've built to see if they can get it on their platform. To a small degree, that's happened already. And I think, you know, that again, that is a credit to the both of us for not just what we've built with it, but also the chemistry which we have together, and also the way we structure the shows, the analysis. Like, it's not just like we interview people, we talk to them. It's not like a formal question answer. We have a conversation with the guest, and we can talk about all sorts of different things, aspects of combat sports or their life or their whatever it may be, their entrance into mixed martial arts. But then also, when we analyze the fights and stuff, your analysis and your knowledge means that we have an exceptional analytic side to the show as well, which I think helps. So yeah, and like I say, it's a privilege, mate, I gotta say. And it's been an even bigger privilege than listening to you passionately talk about your career, your life, everything. And look, we could do another hour probably on different aspects of it. Unfortunately, we've got to try and condense these shows into watchable amounts of time for people. But like, you know, we could do probably 6 parts on all the different things. So I have a couple of questions to finish us off, mate. What is the weirdest thing you've ever seen in MMA in your long and storied career?
Okay, well, it was on, you know, it was on a show where there were pro fighters, and I can't remember exactly what show it was, but basically this guy won his fight. He was elated. They held up his hand. Oh no, I think it was before he held up his hand. That's right. He was really elated. He jumps up on the cage with his arms aloft, you know, where they straddle it. Then he goes and stands up on it and backflips. And as he lands down with his legs straight, and he jars his knee. And he's being held up while they hold up his hand. They give him the win, and he's being carked out. I mean, I just craziness. I mean, you see people do crazy things when they're excited, don't you? But this guy, I mean, he fouled big time. And yeah, it happened in front of everyone. That was one really strange thing, that, you know, he probably ended up having to have surgery after getting a really great win by just doing a silly act in his celebration. Another really strangest thing was, and it never got mentioned, I really regret it, was when we had Lee Dorsky on, was that he come out to have his fight. He jumps in the cage, runs around, he goes to bangs against several of the panels and goes to do it against the cage door that weren't shut yet. And he falls out the cage completely flat on his back, on the back of his head, concussed himself, and still went in there and fought. I can't remember what the result was now, but it was one thing I wanted to cover when we had him on, but we ended up talking and giggling about so many other things. It got overlooked, unfortunately, and went from my mind. But it is something I wanted to talk about with him. But that was a very, very strange occurrence. And for the rest of them, are just the nasty things that actually have happened in recent times. But it happened on Cage Rage with a guy called Ross Pettifer. He ended up breaking the leg of someone. He threw a leg kick and broke his leg. It's the first time I'd ever witnessed a leg break where the poor guy went to step back on it and it had already snapped. That was another weird thing. But, you know, becoming more familiar, being that, you know, it's happened to Conor McGregor now, Anderson Silva, and it was the other guy, Chris Weidman. Ironically, Chris Weidman did it to Anderson Silva and then had it happen to himself. So yeah, I mean, that's some weird things that have happened. So yeah, I don't know whether that classes as weird, but there was a couple of strange things that happened.
Were you ever any of the local, like the UK shows where it ended up kicking off in the crowd, and there's that one video clip which seems to have been taken down off like YouTube and stuff now. where there was like they turned a proper sort of riot?
Yeah. I've been at a couple. One of them was on Cage Warriors in Cambridge. It was held in a skate arena. So yeah, and it all kicked on, made the international news. They ended up bringing in all the police with their headgear on, and luckily I'd left before it really kicked off because they ended up shutting down all the streets and that. I sort of had my fight and went. I'm not too sure it was that night. You know, when you're saying, "Oh, when I fought and beat the French guy," it was UK versus France. And just a note, I didn't get to add it in. It was UK versus France, and there were 10 fights on. I was the only one to win. Wow. And ironically, although I was the only one to win, the copy of that fight is the only one that isn't on the CD that you can get access to, because it got destroyed by accident because the production team that were doing it spilt hot coffee on it. And so my great emphatic win was the only one that weren't on there, and so the only one you could get access was the 9 that we had lost. Yeah, we lost to France 9-1. But yeah, there was a big kick-off there. There was another one at Stanton Account, was in Milton Keynes, sort of like a lower level event. It kicked off, and it was like a war zone. Everyone started. What it was is that one of the fighters who's actually come to the gym a couple of times, he's linked in with the football hooligans, and so they were there watching him fight. And when he didn't get the result that they was wanting, they started throwing chairs everywhere, and it was absolute mayhem. So basically, when it kicked off, I was in the warm-up room with another fighter, and people were coming in like it was a war zone. They were coming in with gashes on their head from the chuck chairs, and they was getting seen to. So the people were hand wrapping, had some medikits there. It was like a war zone. So I was like, what the hell is going on? We go into the main hall. It was just chairs and tables being thrown everywhere. Really quite scary and unnerving. And the only other one that I've got with regards riots was in London. I don't want to say the fight shows because I don't want to, because they still run today. And it was football hooligans, and these hooligans were from back in the 80s. These guys were in their 50s, behaving like absolute kids. I mean, they couldn't fight for toffee. The kind of people they were arguing with, fighting with, would have been done over in a second if they got access to it. But they had chairs, tables, and it was absolute carnage. And it's so disappointing because it's so immature. It's just ridiculous seeing it. But yeah, so I have been exposed to a couple of horrible. Luckily now things are so well run that these things are real oddities, and I like to think that they don't happen on a general basis. So that much as it's been said, look, for the most part, you can go along to these fight events, enjoy them, and know that you're going to be safe because they're very well run today.
100%, mate. And final question of the show: what is the meaning of life for Danny Batten?
Man, love, logic, and adventure. I think, things in the process of my life, I've got to be logical, and everything's about love for me. If you've got love in what you do, the love for the people you're involved with, it's a good thing, and along that accompanies that is adventure. To me, life's got to be adventurous, and that's what makes it interesting. So for me, those 3 things all work brilliant for me. I base everything on being logical in my life. If it's not logical, I don't do it. If it's not logical advice, I don't act on it. And love is a huge part. I have a lot of love for people, a lot of love for the acts that I do in my life. And the adventure part, man, life to me is so much fun because it's adventurous as the limited mind that you look at it upon. To me, the world is such an interesting place, and I live my life adventurously almost on a daily basis.
Beautifully said, mate. Beautifully said. Guys, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ace Podcast Nation, Ace Podcast Nation. And of course, every Wednesday for the next, probably there'll be 10 more episodes after this one. Every Wednesday, 8 o'clock, generally UK time, 3 p.m. Eastern time in the America. It's a new episode of My Story featuring a new guest talking about their journey, the ups, the downs of life and their career. And of course, we have numerous shows every week, from the MMA and boxing show, a football show with Rodri Giggs. We have live shows on Mondays, as well as a My Story Extra live on Monday. Please join us as we break down Danny's journey and the people ask some questions in the live chat. But until then, we bid you farewell. Danny Batten, thank you for your time, my friend.
Pleasure,
I appreciate you finding the time for me. And
yeah.
See you on Sunday.
Yeah, I'll see you Sunday.
Take it easy, my friends.
I got tons of soul, I'm a true collectible. Famous, so famous, number one, desirable. I do what I want, when I want, and how I want it. Leave you with the one in the air, that's how I roll. I got tons of soul, I'm a true collectible. Famous, so famous, number one, desirable. I do what I want, when I want, and how I want it. Leave you with the one in the air, that's how I roll. I got t-shirts, so I don't care about no gold. Better, so much better, flipping incredible. Always on the show, so they know that I still got it. And I never feel sorry, yeah, top of the world. Top of the world. Yeah, top of the world. Top of the world. Yeah, top of the world. Top of the world. Yeah, top of the world. Top of the world. Yeah, top of the world. When I hear him come like a fuse and then ba-bum. Later, see you later, I'm about to blow this up. You can sing or sing if you want, I know you want it. It's always kinda funny, yeah, cause you know I'm a superstar in the sky to lead you on. Haters gonna hate, it's a proof of how they live.